Well, good morning, everybody. Father John Wilson here. It is Tuesday, June 2nd. Happy birthday, Mom. Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. Love you guys. Um, and I wish we're during a happier time. We've got, it's been a really, it's been a difficult week for our country, right? With the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the violence around the country that has followed that. This was brought home to me pretty powerfully this morning, seeing pictures of the destruction even in my old neighborhood back down in the city. So I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about it in the context of something even more urgent, which is prayer. I asked for some suggestions for what I should do my next video series on, and I got some really good ones. But I remember the first thing that was suggested to me. This is way back a while ago. Was someone said, "Hey, I'd really appreciate if you gave some practical lessons on how to pray," and I thought that was a great idea. And I found an interesting source that's going to be kind of my guiding source for this series of reflections, and it's not something you would expect. It is it's a book that came out in 1862. It's called the Redemptorist Mission Book. At least that edition of it came out in 1862. And if you remember my series on Servant of God, Mary Teresa Talon, might remember that this is the book that little 12-year-old Julia Talon would always carry with her, and would delight in it, and would learn how to pray just perusing through it, to the extent that she could even understand it. But what it was, and I found this book online, at least kind of a digital copy. What it was kind of a guide for keeping the practice of the faith going after what would have been and these happened all over the place back then in our country. Would have been a parish mission. So a parish mission back then would have been a group of priests, and the order of the Redemptorists, founded by St. Alphonsus Liguori, was they would do this all the time. They would come into a parish for like 2 weeks and just be giving talks and reflections and hearing confessions like all the time, and the whole parish got involved. And those who had maybe been away from the practice of their faith were invited back and maybe made their first good confession in a long time. Non-Catholics, non-Christians were invited in. There were many great fruits from something like this, and even the sort of the folks who were already there were invited deeper into life with Christ. And then what would be available would be this mission book, which it's actually pretty thick. It was like it's small. It's maybe a little bit bigger than a cell phone in its area, but it would be like 500 pages long, and it would contain lots of different prayers, explanations of the sacraments, basically everything you would need to keep your practice of faith going. In other words, it was a book about how to pray, but in its fullest context. It was about how to build a life of friendship with God. In the context of, okay, this is the moral life. This is how you should act. This is how to go to confession. These are the prayers of the church, right? This is the liturgy. This is how to pray at Mass. And you can imagine like a 12-year-old girl with this big, thick book, really cherishing it, like maybe not understanding it at certain points, and she talks about that too. But in even just in learning the words of some of these prayers, she would have been learning the nature of her relationship with God. And I think there's lots of good stuff there for us too. And I want to talk just briefly today about what actually drew me to this book. First of all, it was the fact that it was a book beloved by a future saint that I've gotten to know. But one of the things I think it's important to bring back up is, first of all, its status as a mission book. It was used to call people back to God. And so there's an urgency about it. There's a seriousness about it because it makes very clear, you can't be reconciled to yourself or to your neighbor without first being reconciled to God. And you can't be reconciled to God if you don't know what God requires of you. We need a lot of reconciliation these days. I'm certainly not my job to judge another man's soul. But something I've certainly been thinking about this past week is that, look, we have so sentimentalized the experience of faith, the experience of quote unquote spirituality in this country. And I think we're seeing some bitter fruit of that even now. This is happening even among Christians. And I think we've gotten to the point, and I don't know if this is, what's in someone's heart, but we've gotten to the point where, you could be committing a grave injustice, like suffocating a defenseless man to death, or, looting and burning, and still have almost a self-conception of, oh, well, I pray, God still loves me. No, that's sentimental garbage. That's not prayer. So we're going to talk about what prayer really means and what prayer requires of us. So that's one thing I appreciate about this book that we're going to use for a guide. It's urgency. And the other thing I appreciate about it is that it's old. Another great sin of our time is just our forgetfulness of the past. And that has terrible consequences. And, this is crept into the church. I think for, we as Catholics, sometimes there's this tendency to think that we can't say anything definitive unless we can quote from some document that was published in the past half century. We have this vague conception that, the spirituality of the past was, it was so rigid, it was so oppressive, as if, someone has a bad experience of a nun slapping him with a ruler in class and just projects that onto 1900 years of church history. We got to get behind that. We got to get beyond that. Because that's not what the church is, and that's not how we're supposed to understand the church as Catholics. The church has, for the past 2,000 years, been carrying the full knowledge of who Jesus Christ is and what his gospel is and what he expects of us into every age, and has been making saints in every age. And so by, going back to, this book that nourished people's spiritual lives 150 years ago, I think we can actually see how that's true. And that's kind of exciting. Now, the 1862 Redemptorist mission book is not the Bible. Even Mother Mary Teresa Tallon, she recognized that. She noted that, she struggled for, some of the misunderstandings she got through reading this book for adults as a 12-year-old girl. She she says, it maybe sometimes describes a few things in some unbalanced ways. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, the Redemptorist mission book says it, so that's the end of the story. But I think it's nonetheless, a good testament to what prayer is. And there's lessons there for us. And so I'm not just going to quote from it, but I'm going to try to bring out what it offers us in terms of understanding what prayer truly is and how to structure our lives around the practice of prayer, around the raising of our hearts and minds to God. So we're going to do that for maybe a couple weeks, and I'm excited to be on this journey with you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.